When the doorbell rang and the first beautiful woman appeared, I finally realized my entire life had been a lie. Not metaphorically an actual lie, built so meticulously that even now, looking back, I can't help but admire its architecture. But at that moment, standing in my own hallway with a suitcase in hand, I had no idea that within an hour I would meet 3 women who would show me who the man I spent 8 years with truly was. My business trip to Denver got canceled at the last minute. The partners rescheduled the meeting for Monday. Honestly, I was relieved. 3 whole days ahead. I could spend them at home with Jacob. We were so rarely together. No rush. No phone calls. No endless spreadsheets on my part or him coming home exhausted from work. I turned the handle. The door opened easily. It wasn't locked. Strange. Jacob always locked it twice. It was his obsessive habit. The hallway didn't smell like our home. Not bad. Just different. Jacob? I called out, setting my suitcase by the wall. He came out of the living room faster than usual, like he'd been waiting to hear my voice. His face showed something between joy and fear, and I thought he just looked tired. Olivia, hi. How come you're... He trailed off mid-sentence, which was so unlike him. Jacob always spoke confidently, in complete sentences. You were on your trip. You weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow. They moved the last meeting. I came back early. I stepped closer to hug him, but he took a step back. So, we decided to have an unexpected little vacation. Jacob nodded too energetically, like he was trying to convince himself of something. His voice sounded unnaturally high. That's great, of course. I just wasn't expecting you. It's good you're home. The intercom buzzed sharply, and I saw him flinch. He looked at the clock. 10:30 p.m. And he frowned. Are you expecting someone? I asked. No, he replied too quickly. Probably for the neighbors. But the intercom buzzed again, more insistently this time. Jacob walked over to it slowly, picked up the receiver, and listened silently. I saw his shoulders tense. I'll be right down, he said into the speaker and hung up. Who is it? Victoria. Remember the doctor I saw 2 years ago? She says it's something urgent about work. I didn't remember any Victoria, but I nodded. Jacob went out, and I stood there in the hallway, trying to figure out what exactly felt wrong. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Jacob walked in with a woman around 45 years old, tall, with short dark hair, wearing a strict gray coat. She greeted me calmly but with a searching look, like she was studying me. Victoria Nelson, she introduced herself. Sorry for dropping by so late. Olivia, I replied. Come in. We barely made it to the living room when the intercom buzzed again. Jacob froze in the middle of the room, and I saw him turn pale. Maybe we shouldn't open it, he suggested, but Victoria shook her head. We should open it, I said. At the door stood another woman. Emily turned out to be about 28, with long blonde hair and big eyes. She seemed nervous, constantly adjusting her purse, avoiding looking at Jacob. I recognized her. She worked at our company, in the marketing department. Emily? I asked in surprise. What are you doing here? She looked first at Victoria, then at Jacob, who was standing by the window, his back turned to all of us. We were supposed to meet, she said quietly. All of us? I asked, and something in my voice made everyone fall silent. We sat down in the living room. Victoria took the armchair, Emily sat on the couch, and I sat across from her. Jacob remained standing, leaning against the wall. The silence stretched on, growing thick, almost tangible. Finally, Victoria spoke. I think today we're all going to learn a lot. Her voice was calm, but there was a determination in it, like someone who had been preparing for a difficult conversation for a long time. I looked at the table and only then noticed what I should have seen right away. 3 glasses, a bottle of cognac, already opened. Jacob had prepared them in advance. He knew this evening wouldn't be normal. Victoria sat up straight, her hands folded in her lap, looking at me with that special expression doctors have when they're about to deliver bad news. Olivia, 2 years ago your husband came to see me. He was complaining about issues that could affect his ability to have children. I nodded. I remembered those months. Jacob had been seeing doctors, getting tests done, always coming home upset. We had just started planning for a baby, and I thought those visits showed how responsible he was. He was a very charming patient, Victoria continued, and there was a note in her voice I couldn't quite place. He told me about his life, his work. He talked about you too. Jacob turned sharply toward the window but said nothing. What exactly did he say? I asked, even though part of me already didn't want to hear the answer. That you're cold, obsessed with business and control, that you want a baby at any cost, and you don't care about his feelings. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. I looked at Jacob, but he didn't turn around. I believed him, Victoria continued. He seemed so unhappy, so lonely in his marriage. He started complimenting me, bringing me flowers to my appointments. Said I was the only one who understood him. Emily let out a quiet sigh, and I realized she recognized this story. Gradually, our conversations got more personal. He talked about how he dreamed of an honest relationship with a woman who saw him as a person, not just a wallet. Even after I gave him the prescription, he kept coming to see me. He said he needed moral support. Then he asked me to prescribe him some medication. Victoria reached into her bag and took out a small box, placing it on the table. A medication to treat varicocele. He showed me a note from a urologist. Everything looked legitimate. I wrote the prescription without checking. I trusted him. And what's so strange about that? I asked, though my heart was already racing. He took it for a year and a half, and about a year after he started, I saw you at the IVF clinic. You were sitting there in the waiting area, looking upset and exhausted. I recognized you from the photos Jacob showed me. Victoria fell silent, staring at her hands. That day, I went home and decided to look up that medication. Turned out, long-term use can reduce male fertility significantly. The world around me seemed to tilt. I remembered those months of trying, the tests, the procedures, my tears and despair. Jacob, hugging me, saying it would all work out, that we just had to keep believing. You're saying that he did this on purpose. I'm saying the note he showed me was fake. And the medication he took for a year and a half made it impossible for you to get what you wanted so badly. Jacob slowly turned towards us. His face was ashen. Victoria, don't, he said quietly. I have to, she snapped back. I'm a doctor, and I helped deceive a woman who trusted her husband. I was just a tool in his plan, and it's killing me. She stood up and came over to me. I'm not just a doctor, Olivia. I'm a person, and I can't stay silent knowing I was used to hurt you. She pulled a copy of the prescription and the medication's medical report from her bag, placing them on the table between us. I looked at Jacob's familiar handwriting on the request form and thought about all those evenings when he comforted me, telling me we'd get through it together, that love was all that mattered, while every day he was taking pills that made my hopes impossible. How long? I asked quietly. How long did you take it? Jacob didn't answer. He sat in the chair with his head down, and I realized I'd never seen him look so small. Emily was silent for so long that I started to think maybe she was just an innocent witness in all this, a coworker who somehow found out and came to support me. But when she finally spoke, her voice trembled with the kind of tension people have right before a confession. Olivia, she began, and her formal tone sounded so out of place in our living room, surrounded by half-finished glasses of cognac and shattered hopes. I want you to know, I never meant to hurt you. She was perched on the edge of the couch, gripping her small black purse, staring down at the floor. Jacob lifted his head and looked at her with an expression I'd never seen before, a mix of pleading and threat. Emily, don't, he whispered. I have to, she replied, without looking up. I'm 28, and I'm tired of living with this. She spoke slowly, with pauses, like each word weighed a ton. It all started at the company party last spring. Jacob approached her while she was standing alone by the window and offered to get her a cocktail. They talked about work, about the company's plans. He was attentive, asked my opinions, praised my ideas. Then he started helping me with projects, Emily continued. He gave me tips on how to present better, who I should network with. I thought I'd just gotten lucky, having such an experienced colleague looking out for me. I listened and tried to remember if Jacob had ever mentioned helping a younger coworker. I couldn't recall. But then again, we both had the habit of not sharing too many details about work. The business trip started about a month later. Emily finally looked up at me. At first just for a day, then for 2. He told me I was ready for bigger responsibilities, that upper management had noticed me. Jacob stood up and walked to the window, turning his back on us. I could see how tense his shoulders were. On those trips, he was different, softer, more open. He told me about his life, how hard his marriage was. Said his wife was just a business partner, not a real woman. Those words hurt me more than the pill story. I always thought Jacob and I were a team, that our work together made us stronger. But to him, it was a problem. He said he missed true intimacy, that he wanted to be with a woman he could just be himself with. Emily's voice was almost a whisper now. And me? I believed him. I thought I'd met a man who truly understood me. Victoria sighed softly, and I realized she knew this story too. The physical part started after our third trip. In Portland, at the hotel. He was so gentle, so grateful, said he hadn't felt so alive in years. Emily fell silent, and I saw a tear roll down her cheek. The day after we got back, I got a promotion. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, that I was really doing a good job, but little by little I realized that every raise, every good project came right after we were together. Did he force you? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. No, he didn't force me. He hinted. Said the company is like a family, and you have to protect your family. That if I wanted to stay, I had to be flexible. Jacob turned to us sharply. Emily, you're misunderstanding everything. I never made you do anything. No, she said, looking directly at him for the first time that evening. What about that conversation in the car, when you told me Romanova from accounting quit because she couldn't fit in with the team? Jacob went silent. I started to have doubts 3 months ago, Emily went on. When you started talking about the future, about how you'd divorce soon, about starting a new life. She pulled her phone out of her purse, found something in their messages, and handed it to me. This is what he sent me 2 weeks ago. I took the phone and read, everything will change soon. I want a baby with you. A real family, with no lies or calculations. The world tilted again. Jacob wanted a baby with another woman, all while making it impossible for me to have one with him for 2 years. How did you find out about the pills? I asked, handing back the phone. By accident. I was looking for tissues in his car's glove box and found the prescription. The medication looked familiar. My ex-boyfriend took something like it after surgery, so I looked it up online. Emily glanced at Victoria. I found an article by Victoria Nelson about that drug. I emailed her. We met up. Turns out, our stories were very similar. The doorbell buzzed for the third time that evening, and this time, no one seemed surprised except me. Emily and Victoria exchanged a look, as if they had been waiting for this. Grace Parker, Victoria said. It's time. Jacob turned even paler, if that was possible. Who's Grace Parker? I asked. A lawyer, Emily replied. Your lawyer, to be exact. I didn't understand what she meant. Jacob and I shared a lawyer, Michael Johnson, an older man who had handled our apartment paperwork. I'd never heard of any Grace Parker. A few minutes later, a woman around 50 walked into our living room. Strict looking, with gray hair pulled back into a tight bun. She was carrying a leather folder, which she set down on the table next to the box of pills. Good evening, Olivia, she said, reaching out her hand to me. Grace Parker. We haven't met, but I know a lot about you and your business. She sat in an empty chair and opened her folder. She took out several documents and laid them out in neat piles on the table. 3 months ago, your husband came to me for a consultation about family law. He wanted to know about divorce procedures and asset division. I felt everything inside me tighten into a hard knot. He described the situation like this. His wife is obsessed with her business. She's cold, doesn't want kids. He said the marriage had been dead for a long time, but he was afraid of the financial consequences of divorce. Grace spoke evenly, without emotion, like she was reading a report. Over time, our meetings became more frequent. Jacob told me about his struggles, about how hard it was to live with someone who only saw him as a source of money. Even after we resolved all the legal questions, he kept coming back. Said I was the only one who understood him. I felt sorry for him. She looked at me with an apologetic gaze. He was very convincing. He talked about how he dreamed of an honest relationship, a family built on love, not calculation. And I believed him. Jacob sat completely still, staring at the floor. We started a personal relationship. He told me I was the only one who understood him, that with me, he felt like a real man. Then he asked me to draft a prenuptial agreement. What kind of agreement? I asked. A document stating that in case of divorce, he would get half of your share in the business and the apartment. He said it was because he'd invested his work and time into building the company. Grace pulled out a document from her folder. I recognized it instantly. Jacob had brought it home a month ago, saying it was to protect both of us in case something unexpected happened. I signed it, I said quietly. Yes, but there's one problem. Grace opened the document to a specific page and pointed at a line with Jacob's birth date. Here, his date of birth is wrong. 1 digit is off, which makes the entire document invalid. I looked at the date and realized it wasn't a mistake. Jacob knew his birthday perfectly well. A month ago, I started doubting his honesty. There were too many contradictions in his stories. I found Victoria on social media. She posts articles about medical ethics. I messaged her, and we met. Through her, I reached Emily. For weeks, we exchanged messages, comparing facts. She pulled out another document from her folder, a printout of bank transfers. It turned out that for 6 months, Jacob had been taking money from our joint account and transferring it to pay for an apartment he rented the place where he met with them. The numbers on the page blurred before my eyes. The amount was huge, almost a third of our savings. "Olivia," Grace said firmly, "today we're putting all the cards on the table, either peacefully or through court. The choice is yours." Grace opened her laptop and turned the screen towards us. I saw spreadsheets, documents, photos, a whole file on the man I had spent 8 years with. The prescription from Victoria Nelson. She pointed at the first document, the bank transfers for the apartment, messages with Emily about his plans for divorce and starting a new family. Each document landed on the table like a playing card, revealing a picture I didn't want to see. The fake urologist note he used to get the prescription. The rental agreement for an apartment on 5th Avenue in his name. Utility bills. Jacob stayed silent, fists clenched. His hands were shaking. And finally, Grace opened the last file, a power of attorney for managing your share of the company, which he planned to claim after the divorce. The document looked official, with stamps and signatures. But Grace pointed at Jacob's personal data. Here again, his date of birth is wrong by 1 digit. This makes it invalid, but he probably assumed that during the chaos of divorce, no one would notice. "This isn't what you think," Jacob finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "I just wanted to protect myself. Olivia, you know how tough you are in business. I was scared of ending up with nothing." "Protect yourself?" I repeated. "By taking medicine that made it impossible for us to have a child? By sleeping with my employee? By lying to 3 women at the same time?" Grace closed her laptop and looked at Jacob sternly, like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "Jacob Harris, I will now read out what we have against you. Attempted asset fraud. Abuse of power over a subordinate, obtaining prescription medication with forged documents, misuse of marital funds without spousal consent." Each charge sounded like a hammer strike. "We have 2 options," she continued. "First, we take everything to the police and prosecutors. Second, you sign a voluntary agreement. You renounce any claims to her assets, return all misused funds, and never approach these women again." Jacob looked at her, then at me, then at Emily and Victoria. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Real fear. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked quietly. "Until morning," Grace replied. "Tomorrow at 10, either we meet at the notary, or I go to the police." She stood and gathered the documents back into her folder. "Emily will receive a recommendation letter and compensation for emotional distress. Victoria will get an apology and reimbursement for therapy costs. Olivia will get back all the money he spent and a clean divorce with no claims from him." The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like the air itself had thickened. I looked at my husband and realized I was seeing his true self for the first time in 8 years. Scared, caught, pathetic. "And if I don't agree?" he asked. "Then tomorrow morning, you'll have a very unpleasant conversation with people in uniform," Grace said. "And believe me, in that case, you'll lose much more than just assets." Jacob nodded slowly, like even moving his head took all his strength. "I need to think." "Think," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. "But think fast." Grace, Victoria, and Emily stood up to leave. At the door, Victoria turned to me. "Olivia, if you need someone to talk to, I mean a therapist, I can give you some contacts." I nodded, unable to speak. When the door closed behind them, we were alone. Jacob sat in the armchair with his head down. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. "Olivia," he finally said, "you didn't have to catch me." I turned to look at him. "What?" "No. I mean, I could have just not lied," he corrected himself. "I could have just told you I didn't want kids, that I was afraid of responsibility, that I was scared to change my life." For the first time that evening, his voice sounded honest. "But instead, you chose to betray me," I said quietly. "Pack your things," I told him. "You have an hour." He nodded and walked to the bedroom. I stayed by the window, listening as he moved around the apartment, packing, searching. No yelling, no scenes, no attempts to explain. Just a man gathering his things and leaving another person's life. An hour later, he came out with 2 bags and stopped by the door. "Olivia." "Go," I said without turning around. The door closed. I heard the elevator, then silence. For the first time in 8 years, I was alone in that apartment, and the feeling was strange, not scary, but freeing. The Starbucks on Madison looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago. Same tables, same plants in the corners, same smell of cinnamon and vanilla. But the women sitting at the corner table had changed. I arrived first, ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and sat by the window. The habit of arriving early stayed with me from my old life, when every minute was scheduled and every meeting had an agenda. Victoria showed up 5 minutes later. She looked younger, her hair had grown out, and she'd swapped her stiff suits for softer clothes. She ordered a cappuccino and sat across from me. "How are you?" she asked. "It depends," I answered honestly. "And you?" "Same, but better than 6 months ago." We sat in silence, watching people walk by outside. It was strange to think that once we'd been total strangers, connected only by one man's name. Emily came 10 minutes late, her cheeks pink from the cold, eyes shining. She looked so much better. The tension she used to carry was gone. "Sorry I'm late," she said, unwinding her scarf. "I had an exam." "How's law school going?" Victoria asked. "Great. Turns out, I really like it." "Who would have thought?" She ordered a latte with syrup and sat next to Victoria. Grace arrived right on time, just like 6 months ago. Serious, put together, carrying her same leather folder. But now her face looked a little softer. "Ladies," she greeted, sitting down. "How's life?" "I'm learning how to live again," I said. "Literally?" "I'm in therapy, reading books about codependency, trying to figure out how I spent 8 years with someone without knowing who he really was." "And your business?" Grace asked. "It's fine. Actually, better than before. Turns out, when you're not constantly trying to prove to someone you're not a cold-hearted career woman, work gets easier." Emily laughed. "I did the opposite. I left business. While I study, I work part-time as a legal assistant. Grace hired me." "How's she doing?" I asked Grace. "She's doing very well. She has good instincts and a desire to help people. I think she'll make a great family lawyer." Victoria stirred her cappuccino, staring into the cup thoughtfully. "I'm back to practicing medicine, but now I also run support groups for women who've gone through emotional abuse. Turns out, there are more of us than you'd think." "Heard anything about him?" Emily asked quietly. We all knew who she meant, even though his name wasn't spoken. "He moved to another city," Grace said. "Working at a small company, renting an apartment. He's paying alimony regularly, even though technically we didn't demand it." "Alimony?" I asked, surprised. "Compensation," Grace explained. "As part of our agreement, he committed to pay each of you a set amount for 2 years. Moral damages, you could say." I hadn't known that. After that night, I stayed away from the legal details and left it all to Grace. "You know what's strange?" I said. "Sometimes I think, what if we'd never met? If each of us had just kept living with our own version of the truth? Do you think it would have been better?" Victoria asked. "I don't know. Maybe easier, but not better."